The real property essay question from July of 1999 is another tremendously complicated and difficult problem. It's another racehorse, too. And it's yet another essay question that proves the rule of thumb that I've outlined already. The shorter the problem, the more difficult it is. Take a look at the call of the question. At least for a change, it's quite a helpful one. 1. What are artists' rights and remedies, if any, against landlord, machinist, and developer? Discuss. Well, we've got 3 lawsuits. I'll probably be inclined to assign a Roman numeral to each one of them. Letter A will be the theory of liability. Letter B will be remedies. And remedies includes damages, restitution, and equitable relief. So we can organize our thoughts about responding to this first call of the question without even reading the fact pattern. And that's quite helpful. Now look at the second call of the question. It's a narrower one. What are artists' rights and remedies, if any, against the State Power Department for blocking the path? Discuss. It looks like an easement issue, and as it turns out, that's exactly what it is. So go to the top of the problem, and let's have a look at these complicated facts together. It's a 1999 question. We are told that artist has had a year-to-year lease of a 3rd floor of a loft building since the early 1960s. So for the better part of 40 years, this tenant has been in this loft. She's used it both as a residential location and as a studio work location, just like a lot of other artisans have done in the neighborhood. She enjoys the serenity of her unit, and she enjoys the panoramic views and the nearby park. In paragraph 2, just a year before this question came out, in 1998, landlord rents a lower floor of the building to machinist, whose operations are very noisy, but not inconsistent with the zoning. Artist complains about this noise to machinist and landlord, and nothing happens. Well, we can imagine that the theory of liability against the machinist will be for nuisance, and one of the theories of liability against landlord could be for breach of the various real estate covenants that go along with leases. In paragraph 3, we learn that developer has decided to build a large office tower nearby, which is going to block artist's view when it's completed. The office building will provide needed employment for the community. Well, you probably have seen this issue come up on enough multi-state questions to know that artist is unlikely to have any rights or remedies with regard to a development that blocks her view. Then, in the final paragraph of the fact pattern, the State Power Department comes into play. They also have started to begin construction, this time of electric and communications lines for the new office building that developer is erecting. For the next several years, the construction will block a path across an undeveloped lot which separates artist's neighborhood from the park. The path has been used regularly for many years by artists and other neighborhood residents because the only other access to the park is by a much longer and circuitous street route. And then we get the call of the question again. So, as predicted, there's a great deal of action going on. We've got to deal with 4 lawsuits. They're all relatively complicated, and we've got to do it within a 1-hour time limit. So, this is a challenging problem, but once we look at it carefully, I think you'll find that none of the issues presented here really are that complicated. I think that this fact pattern does serve to prove a couple of points that I've been making already in our work together more than once. The first of which is torts, contracts, property, and remedies really are all one big subject. They're all tested together, and it's very common for issues from all of these subjects to appear in one fact pattern. Now, I don't think it's unreasonable for the State Bar to characterize this fact pattern as a real property question. It's their label, not mine. But as we look at it more carefully, I think we'll see there's a lot more to it than just real property. And the second point that I think this question tends to prove is real property is almost never tested by itself the way contracts and torts can be tested in a vacuum. With almost every real property question we review together, both in this seminar and in remedies, and then again in crossover questions at the very end of our work together, we're going to see that real property commonly is tested with other subjects at the same time, and that's true here also. So now please take a look at the outline of issues that I've presented, and I think you'll see that my outline lays out our answer very cleanly. We've got to set it up very carefully in order to be able to answer thoroughly under time constraints. So let's take a look at my outline. First, we deal with artist versus landlord. This may be the most complicated of the lawsuits, and the reason for the complexity is that the theories of liability can arise both from breaches of the real estate covenants and from breach of contract. She's got theories of liability for more than one subject. We're going to have a separate section on remedies and then reach a conclusion. Next, we consider artist versus machinist. She's only got one theory of liability against machinist, and that's private nuisance. She's got remedies that include damages and her preferred remedy, a prohibitory injunction in equity. Then we reach a conclusion. Next, we turn to artist versus developer. She's got arguments about nuisance in torts and an easement in real property law, and then we reach a conclusion. Finally, the artist's last lawsuit is against the State Power Department. Her theory of liability is based on real property law, an easement by prescription, or based on tort law for a public nuisance. We'll talk about remedies and reach a conclusion there also. Now, once we've organized our answer this carefully, actually writing the answer is a lot more straightforward. Really, at this point, we're only dealing with a series of short answer questions. So let's have a look together at how I choose to answer all of these short questions. We start off with artist versus landlord. Notice I lead with the facts. I indicate that artist has been a tenant for a long time and that in July of '98, landlord rented a lower floor to machinist who makes a lot of noise, so artist sues landlord based on real estate contracts and contracts theories. The first of these are the breach of real estate covenant theories. And notice I lead a little bit with the law for a change. The warranty of habitability, the warranty of quiet enjoyment are the ones that are relevant to our analysis here. Next, I devote each of the following two paragraphs to analyzing those two warranties. First, the warranty of habitability, and then the warranty of quiet enjoyment. You'll notice that I focus on the zoning and I focus on the factual details throughout. The bottom line is, it looks to me as if the landlord has breached the warranty of habitability, and she may well be entitled to obtain damages from the landlord for this breach. Next, we turn to breach of contract. And here I only have a couple of sentences to write about this. The breaches of the real estate covenants also probably constitute a breach of contract. And then we turn to remedies, and here, artists should be entitled to damages for the breach of the warranty of habitability. They would be measured based on the value of the loss of her use. She also ought to be able to withhold rent so long as landlord allows this problem to continue, or maybe abate the rent payments. She also would be entitled to terminate the lease and leave if she chose, but it's obvious that this is a tenant who loves where she lives and doesn't want things to change too much. So I conclude that the landlord breached the warranty of habitability and his contract and will be liable for damages. Next, we turn to artist versus machinist. This too is a comparatively complex lawsuit. She has claims for private nuisance that are fairly succinct. I discuss them in one paragraph. I think probably she will be able to establish a private nuisance theory. She would, thus, be entitled to damages, which would make artist whole, but clearly her preferred remedy is not a legal remedy of damages, but rather the equitable remedy of a prohibitory injunction. Notice I focus on the elements of injunctive relief within this discussion, but really, ultimately, this is not a question about equitable remedies. This is a question about real property and civil litigation, which involves this little loop on equity. So I squish all of it into one paragraph. If you chose to break it up into the elements of equity and then focus on each element, that's great. I just don't think there's time to be able to do it reliably before running out of time. So I squish it down into one paragraph. It's always okay to spread it out if you think you've got time. The bottom line with regard to the lawsuit between the artist and the machinist is the machinist is liable for damages, and probably artist will not get an injunction unless the balance of hardships favor her. Next, we turn to artist versus developer. Once again, I lead with the facts. They indicate that the artist has enjoyed her view throughout her tenancy, and that the developer is going to construct this office tower which blocks her view. Her theories of liability are not very good or strong. I acknowledge that up front. We start off with nuisance. And certainly from artist's point of view, this new office tower is going to substantially interfere with her use and especially her enjoyment of her leasehold. The problem is that the balance of hardships doesn't favor her. And we are given a big hint about the balance of hardships in the fact pattern itself. Why do you think it is that they would tell us in so many words that this building is going to provide needed employment in the neighborhood? The answer is to make it evident that the balance of hardships is going to go against one person who occupies one residential tenancy as compared to the entire neighborhood. Next, there's a real property theory that the artist can bring against the developer, and that is an easement theory. The problem is easements for air and light never are implied, and the fact that we've got a year-to-year tenant, not even a landowner, present as plaintiff, suggests that her theory is even weaker. Even the landlord almost certainly wouldn't be able to establish an easement theory against the developer, and the reason is it would have to be an implied easement. So the bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, is the artist doesn't have any rights against the developer. And I do think that is a clear, black and white, correct answer to the question presented. And anybody who's holding in favor of artists here, I think, is just wrong. Then we turn to the last lawsuit, artists versus the State Power Department. And here again, I lead with the facts. The construction of power and communications lines blocks the path that artists and other neighborhood residents use. Artists is going to pursue prescriptive easement and nuisance theories, and although I don't lead with this up front as I did in the earlier lawsuit, I don't think the artist has very strong theories. We begin with the prescriptive easement theory, and here I use the same stripped-down approach to adverse possession that you've already seen. You may choose to use a more elaborate version if you know it well and can present it quickly. The compressed version that I use actually has appeared in one or two answers that the bar itself has published, so we know it's not a crackpot approach. We see that the physical and time elements are met, but the hostility element can't be met. Artist did not have exclusive use of this easement. She never tried to prevent anybody else from using it, and so artist's efforts to establish a prescriptive easement should fail. Next, we turn to the public nuisance issue, and here the artist and the other people in the neighborhood could seek to enjoin the blocking of the path via a public nuisance theory. But we've got two big problems, each of which probably is fatal to the claim. First, the balance of hardships would favor the power department because the building is going to provide employment that the neighborhood needs. Secondly, the residents are not really barred from the park itself. They are just burdened in having to take a longer route to get there. So even if there was a success by the artist in this lawsuit, the artist would only obtain damages, not equity, again, because the balance of hardships would go against her. So ultimately, I conclude that the theory of liability itself will not succeed, and therefore no remedies will be required. And that wraps up the consideration of yet another challenging real property question.